everyone, and welcome back. It's been a while since I put a video out. What I had in mind was a little unboxing. I haven't done one of these before, and I'm not particularly sure that I will continue to do them. This is kind of a one-off thing for myself. I picked up a few cars that were kind of special to me after I sold quite a few of my axle boxes. I think I sold about 24 of them, all in quick succession, which is great. So after selling the units that I had put together, I picked up a few cars that were pretty special to me, ones that have been on my to purchase list for quite some time, and a couple extras that I found along the way that I just couldn't resist sneaking in there. I'm sure you know what I mean. So we'll get into it just kind of one by one. We'll do a couple of things. We'll just kind of weigh the cars. I'm going to pry the magnets out of them as we're going just to get them track ready. So as we review them, I'll pull the magnets out. We'll kind of do a pre-weight and a post-weight, and I'll record those values down just to kind of keep record of potentially how much weight I should add to the car just to get it to that factory weight again. So let's get started here. So most of these cars are still in their plastic wrap. It's been a few weeks since I've purchased them, so haven't actually laid eyes on them yet because I've been a little busy with work and family. So we'll just get started with the first one that's here. This one is a Fly Porsche 935 K3 24 Hours of Daytona from 1980. At this point I have two Fly cars. I have a Ford GT and a Porsche 917K. The Ford drives fairly well straight out of the box. The 917K sounds pretty terrible on track, and the motor pod kind of makes the car crab walk down the track. You can see the front is 12 o'clock and the rear end is kind of driving at 11:59. It's not quite the most sound setup yet, but I am planning on developing that car into something that's actually drivable. This car not having the same motor pod, I suspect that this will drive a little bit better out of the box. Not having a motor pod essentially is what I think is going to save this car from the same fate as the Porsche. So looking at this car on the inside, it's pretty simple. See the lack of the motor pod. Just a straight sidewinder. The magnet was in this position. Yeah, this thing it's very, very basic. There's not a lot of gusseting. It's got a lot of flex. There's no other plastic that would keep this from flexing. The guide does have the little ferrule, I like to call it, system. Yeah, I like the ferrule setup better than the grub screw. With the front axle, there are no adjustments that can be made. No grub screws, no adjusting means of any sort. It looks like the motor is just pressure fitted into the chassis plate. We got some plastic bushings there on the rear axle. I mean, overall, these Fly cars are not overly expensive, so you kind of get what you pay for. With the body, you can see the driver is missing its head. It's in there, just rolling around. But I mean, the detail of this car is quite nice. The paint is quite nice as well. You know, there's no dull spots. The decals aren't peeling off. Overall, it's a pretty decent car. I'm pretty happy with it. Overall, it's a great looking machine. I'm pretty happy with the way that it looks in person. Okay, so the magnets are out, and one thing I did notice was these really, really nice looking wheel inserts are not really well stuck in there, so I'm going to have to address that issue before I put it on track. If anyone out there has some pointers on how to keep those in place, aside from gluing them into their locations, please let me know. That is the Fly Porsche 953. So overall, it's a great looking car. Not too worried about the way that it's going to drive at this time. I think the number one thing would just be getting tires trued and getting the weight correct. Looking forward to trying this one on track. Okay, so the next one is a Slot.it. I can tell by the rough color of the outer packaging. The inside is what's the special part. And this one I've been waiting for a very long time, eyeballing it probably for about 6 months now. So let's get into this one. It is the Porsche 962C Repsol livery. This one is quite a beautiful looking car. It's very difficult to find. I've found the folks that are selling them on eBay are generally looking for quite a pretty penny, and I did find this one an online store that wasn't eBay, and it was actually a reasonable price. Let's get plastic off. I'm gonna get a better look at this car. Here's a question for you folks. The cardboard casing that covers the plastic display case, do you guys keep it? Do you throw it out? I'm an advocate of not holding on to things. No shelf queens, no cardboard. So for those that like to keep this, sorry man, can't keep it. This is enough for me. I'm happy to report that the driver's head is intact. Nothing shaking in this one, thankfully. So we'll just go ahead and do a pre-weight recording here. Okay, so we've got the magnet out, and just kind of a quick overview of the inside of the car. One thing I do notice is the front axle appears to have little to no adjustment capabilities whatsoever. I'm going to have to address that. There's no screws for adjusting the height of the front axle. The center supports kind of closer to the guide are fixed. They're not the kinds that come out. And then inside where the axle fits through the bushings, if you want to call it, there are no adjustable or removable parts. So I'm going to have to see what I can do with this car to get it set up properly. But overall, I'm happy with the way that the guide looks. It's using the ferrule type system. I think this is probably an earlier release. Maybe someone can give me kind of a heads up on when this was released and see if there's anything that can be done about the front of this. Maybe I can change might even be able to change the body out with one of my other newer 962s. Let me know what you would suggest for this car. I would like to see this be a decent performer. So all in all, I'm excited to drive this car. I know some folks might disagree that a car this rare should be driven, but I'll just be careful with it. Got to enjoy these things as much as they look nice sitting in a box. You don't live forever, and guaranteed the next person that's going to inherit this isn't going to take care of it as much as I should. Okay, so the next car, another one that I've been keeping an eye on. Not necessarily the brand that I was hoping that I could find it in, but still a worthy car nonetheless. And it is the Mazda 787B. This one is by Mr. SlotCar. Local Canadian group, from what I understand. Sorry guys, I'm getting rid of that box. So get the packaging open here and get a better look at this car from the inside. I do keep this stuff, in case you're wondering. Okay, so overall the car looks pretty good. There doesn't seem to be anything that's missing or broken or loose out of the box. There's a little bit of a kink in, well, I shouldn't say a kink, but just a misalignment of the rear spoiler, but it also looks like it's quite flexible, so I'm sure that's perfectly fine. Overall, the paint looks fantastic. The detail is very, very good. Okay, we've got the body off the car, and just a quick overview. We've got a motor pod that looks fairly highly adjustable. This is the second Mr. Slot car, or MRSLOTCAR, that I've purchased. And this is actually the first time I've had a good look at it. The first car I bought was the Shadow, and to be honest, I kept that car in the box because I was just wanting to keep it pristine, and I haven't even had a chance to look at the inside of it. But overall, with this car, I'm actually quite surprised on how tunable it looks. The rear drivetrain looks very, very well built, and the wiring to the guide is using the ferrule style connections, which I do like. And the front axle does look highly adjustable, which I'm quite happy about. So overall, I have a feeling this car will perform well on track, just with its adjustability, and it seems to be quite a solid built car. I think with a bit of focus on tuning and tire prep, this car will be quite a contender. Okay, without further ado, we'll get to the next one here. This is another FlySlot. Yes, this one I coveted for quite a while. The 917 LH. Just the lines of this car really kind of caught my eye, and I'm really glad to have it in my hands to be able to see it properly in person. Let's get a better look at this thing on the inside. Having a bit of difficulty getting this car off the plate. This set screw underneath is just spinning and spinning, and the car is not getting any looser, which is concerning. Okay, so after a bit of hacking and slashing with a pair of flush cuts, I was able to get the car off the plate without damaging the plate. There's a little bit of residue left over on the car. We'll see if we can get that off. First thing I noticed is the motor pod is not the same as my 917K, so my hopes of this car driving better out of the box are already higher. Okay, with the body off, overall the car is pretty simple. It's hard to show you from this detail here, but no adjustable motor pod, plastic gearing. Front axle is with a through bar as opposed to an independently connected one, which I'm happy about. And the rear one has plastic bushings, but again, because the motor pod isn't a separate unit that's bolted in with some screws, it's not going to crab walk like my other car, so I think this will actually do better on track than I anticipated. As for the residue of that little screw, I'm probably just going to drill that out. It doesn't seem to want to come out on its own. I think it's been cross-threaded, which is why I think that's why it's not coming out with any tools at all. If you're in the market for a FlySlot, don't let my opinion of them change your opinion. They are great looking cars, and I think they do have great potential. This one more so than my 917K. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said that there is a 3D printed chassis that I could make for that other car, so I could possibly start throwing in some other branded components to make it drivable. So that's probably what we're going to do with that car. So we'll get into the next one here. It's another FlySlot. Hopefully another winner. Right, so this car is the Lola T70 Mark III 24-hour Daytona 1969. This is another car that I stared at for countless hours on eBay, just wondering how good of a car it actually is. I think I bought this from a guy in the UK, so it was a bit of a gamble, but I mean, upon first looking at it, it's a striking car. It's beautiful. The blue paint job is quite something, and you know, the details are there, and I'm pretty happy with it overall. Definitely a worthy buy. Let's see if we can get it off the build plate. So far so good. Look at that. Not every one of them's glued to the build plate. We're looking at a chassis that doesn't have a separate motor pod. It's one unified chassis. Similar to the previous one, I'm hoping, on the inside. So let's just crack it open. Don't ask me why I call it the build plate. I think it's just a turn of phrase that I'm used to saying with regards to 3D printing. Okay, so one thing I noticed about this car that I didn't notice about the previous one was there's a magnet in the front and the rear. Did I miss that? Ah, I did miss it. There is one on the front as well. I'll deal with that later. What do you guys do with these magnets when you're done with them? Just curious, aside from putting them on the fridge and letting my kids lose them. Do you have any other tips, tricks? I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on countless magnets that you collect.
So this car is similar to the 917 LH. It's got a through bar axle, thankfully. We got ferralized guide pickup. Still have the same 90-degree drivetrain, plastic bushings. I mean, overall it's pretty simple. You know, the front axle's got a little bit of play. Unfortunately, there's no physical way to tighten the slack on that. A guy might be able to drill out up the plate and add some grub screws if you're so inclined, but we'll just run this machine as is for now. One thing that I do like about FlySlot is they always find some way to make the chassis meld with the body in some way. So this particular one, you can see there's these little exhaust pipes here, 2 of them. And there's 2 little holes here, and the only way to get this body on is to fit those pipes through the holes. It's pretty slick.
Overall, this is a solid car. If you can get your hands on this one, I'd highly recommend it. It looks quite nice, and I have a feeling with a bit of tuning magic, this thing will perform quite well. Right, so the next car is a Slot.it, as you can tell by the packaging. This particular one I got from a fellow in Calgary, but this is a McLaren M6D. I'll get you a better look at it here in a second. You can see that well enough. It's quite a nice looking car. So the bottom side, just a standard slotted motor pod. Looks like there's a couple screws for the pod itself, and then the ones for mounting the body to the chassis plate. And we'll get the body off and remove the magnet. With the body off, I can see that the front axle is highly adjustable. There's grub screws already in the bottom, and it just has your standard push-in style bushings in the front. So I can probably pull those out and put in some grub screws. The front axle feels quite taut. There's a bit of friction in there, and it does look like it's quite flush with the underplate of the chassis. So we'll have to do some adjustments there before we get it on track. There's a bit of solder on the far end of the drive shaft. It almost looks like it's a bit of over solder. I'm not quite sure. I've never seen that before on a car yet. I'll just have to be careful with pulling that off. I'm concerned that maybe it'll throw that motor shaft off balance while it's running at high speed. And now that I'm looking at this car in closer detail, I can see that the spur gear is actually cracked. I don't think I'm going to be able to go after Slot.it to get a replacement gear. That's fine. I've got a couple of these in my inventory already. Bit of work to do on this car, but that's okay. Yeah, aside from the damage to the spur gear and whatever that extraneous solder is on the far end of the motor drive shaft. Quite a nice looking car. Looking forward to getting this one on track as well. On the topic of Can-Am cars, the seller I bought the M8D from also had the M8B. This is not a Slot.it though. This is a brand that I have never seen in person. VANQUISH MG. I'm sure maybe some of you are familiar with it. This is an absolutely brand new manufacturer in my catalog. I can't even think of any cars that I've seen in previous searches by this brand, but overall it looks like it's a very nice build. It's kind of a unique way that they mount their cars to plate. I mean, overall the scale of this car feels, it just looks a lot wider than the previous car. Maybe we can pull that one out just to compare the two. Not sure how well you can see that. The rear tires of this other car are about 50, at least 50% wider than the Slot.it. It's kind of an interesting car itself. I mean, when I was looking at this car in his Kijiji ad, I had no idea what the car was. I just saw that there were two McLarens and I said, gotta have them both. So in looking at this thing, aside from the size, the one thing I do notice, it has some sort of differential in the rear, which is pretty unique. This is the first car I've ever seen that has a rear differential. I'm really curious to get inside the inner workings of this thing to see what it's all about. So let's get to it. So after pulling the shell off, there's a inner shell. The detail on this is pretty outstanding. Okay, with those screws off, it looks like the detail part of this is starting to come free. I'm just trying to be gentle because this feels like it doesn't want to come off. The detail on this is pretty impressive. And then we get to the inner working. So looking at the front end, it has a very, I wouldn't say it's a remarkable front axle. It's kind of just pressure fitted. There's some brass bushings that look a little bit oxidized. You know, the detail on the engine here is quite impressive. There's some detail on the rear end where the springs are. That's kind of unreal. I've never seen a car this detailed before. You know, is this my first 1/24 scale? I don't know. I'm going to look into this a bit further. You know, overall, it looks like the tub that I just pulled off holds the front end down. This is very loose now. And then, yeah, getting to the rear end here, you can actually see by spinning one wheel, the other wheel spins in the opposite direction. So that is definitely a gear or ball diff. Probably a gear diff. Ball diff of this size would be pretty difficult to assemble. I am very interested to see how this car drives on track. You know, I see the benefit of a differential coming from the RC world. In the off-road and on-road, differentials played a huge role. But yeah, this car is pretty unique. I'll try and get some close-ups of the detail work in the back here as well. This is a pretty unique car. I'm interested to dive a bit deeper into this vehicle. Now I gotta get it back together. Alright, so if you've made it this far, thank you. I know sometimes these unboxings kind of feel like Christmas Day with your friends where you didn't get any presents, or kind of like show and tell at school when no one else is doing show and tell. If you stuck around this long, thank you. Carry on. So this one's really no surprise. It's not hidden in any bubble wrap, but it is a Group 5 by Sideways, and it is a BMW M1. Let's get a little closer look here if we can. Now I've taken a bit of a liking to the Group 5 collection, just kind of striking bodies, the whole concept of kind of roadworthy cars that had bodywork just bolted onto them and they just went to town with turbos and excessive power. I can see why people like it, and I can see why they make slot cars out of them. So this particular car kind of has this weird polka dot livery. I'm not sure why I chose it. I think I just wanted a BMW, and this was kind of one that kind of caught my eye. It's a angle winder, and again, kind of the same motor pod design as you would expect to see. It looks like it has grub screws already installed on the front axle. Let's have a look on the inside of this after a quick weigh here. Okay, so inside the unit, we've got the guide set up with the grub screw with no eyelet or ferrule, whatever you want to call it. I haven't had much luck with this system. I find that, after a bit of driving, the guide moving around causes the wires to shear off, so I'm just going to keep an eye on that. It looks as though the front axle does have grub screws top and bottom, so that's nice. It'll be good to be able to adjust that right off the hop. We've got nice brass bushings in the rear. Yep, looking at the spur gear, it looks like it's intact. It looks as though these have wheel inserts as well, so I'll just have to find a way to keep those intact. If someone has a comment on how to keep these nice looking wheel inserts in the wheels themselves, please let me know, because this is not a problem that I've faced yet, but I'm assuming that one day I'll be looking for those on the track. Yes, overall I think this car will be about as good as any other sideways car. I've got a few of them that drive quite well with a little bit of tuning and modification. Get this car under spotlight for you. Okay, carrying on with the sideways and the Group 5 trend here. This one that I was pretty excited to get my hands on. It is the Moby Dick Pink Pig livery Porsche 935. Let's get a closer look at this one. So, having a look at that, I'm sure everyone that's driven enough slot cars in their lives knows the Pink Pig livery. The bodywork on this car is just absurd. It almost looks like a whale. I'm sure that is exactly why it was given the name Moby Dick. Let's get a better look at the car on the inside. So, not much different than the one previous. Angle winder motor, same sort of motor pod. Looks like it's 4 or 5 screws. Again, it looks like it has grub screws on the underside of the front axle already. And quick inspection of the spur gear, looks like it's ready to race. The first Moby Dick car I bought did have a broken spur gear, and that was at a time where I didn't have any inventory of aftermarket parts like that. So I had to wait a few weeks before I could drive that car. But I've learned my lesson, as I'm sure everyone does when they buy these nice cars for the first time. Okay, looking at this car from the inside, again, we're dealing with the same situation with the grub screw inserted motor wires. It already looks like these wires are trying to pull out. So we'll definitely fix that before we get this thing on track. Grub screws on the top side of the front axle, which is nice. We'll be able to set this thing up quite quickly. Again, the rear axle appears to be in good shape in terms of the spur gear. We got brass bushings, but overall this looks like a pretty nice car. I think it will go well right off the hop with a little bit of adjustment. Let's get that magnet out, and we'll just take a quick as left weight. In terms of whether you should buy this car or not, if you can get your hands on it, I would. I mean, this car is pretty signature. You've got that 917K from NSR that everyone loves with the pink pig livery. I don't have my hands on it yet. I'm kind of on the fence. I'm trying to collect some NSRs, but not necessarily of the classic LeMans series yet. But if you do enjoy Group 5, this is quite a striking car to have in your arsenal. So let's just get a couple close-ups of this as well. Okay, so this is the last sideways and last Group 5 of the video. We have another Porsche 935. This one is this pretty nice looking blue Security livery. Let's get a better look at it so you can see that well enough. We have this nice white and blue with these white rim inserts. A little bit different body style than the pink pig. With the car removed, we've got this pretty well the same layout. Grub screwed front axle, motor pod that's got an angle winder motor. Quick inspection, looks like the spur gear is in tip-top shape, ready for the track. Overall, it feels like a pretty solid car. Let's get it open and see what we're dealing with on the inside. One thing I do notice right away is one of the wheels is quite close to the body, so you might have to just adjust the left and right placement of that axle. Yeah, so again, the same thing. We've got the grub screw installed, motor wiring. We'll see how that lasts. So front axle has grub screws top and bottom, which is great. Quick, easy tuning, brass bushings in the back. Again, that spur gear looks like it's ready to go. If you're in a Group 5 and you don't have a blue car, this is probably the most blue car you're going to find. Joking aside, it is quite a nice looking machine. Probably tunes up just as well as any other sideways vehicle. Looking forward to getting this one on track as well. Let's get a couple close-ups of this one. Alright, so we are nearing the end here. The previous car was the last of the Group 5. This is the last of the Can-Am series. Now this one I am pretty eager to open. I've been waiting for about 4 weeks to be home long enough to even look at it. This is my very first Thunderslot, and it is the McLaren Elva Mark I. Let's get a closer look at this thing. Right off the hop, I can see what looks to be a wheel well that's fallen out of one of the rims, so we'll sort that out once we get in there. Okay, so we've located the rim that's in question. It's missing a plastic wheel insert. Doesn't feel like it's stuck in there all that well to begin with, but actually it looked kind of cool with it out, so we might go down that road. For those that have Thunderslots in their library of cars, I'm sure you can all agree that they are quite good machines. You know, I've seen a few other guys out there race these on their tracks. I think Marty's got that red one that seems to be quite his favorite car, and I can see why. It's a beautiful looking machine. It feels like a featherweight, and talk about sleek. There's definitely some detail that's put into these cars as well. You know, fit and finish looks fantastic. It already looks as though the factory tires are very grippy. I'm curious to hear about what other folks are running for setup on these, but we'll have a look at this for ourselves and just kind of assess what can be done with it with the materials that I have already. So looking at the bottom side, not much different than any other car. It's got a bunch of motor pod screws. I don't see yet how the front axle is adjustable, but we'll get into that in a minute here. One thing that that I wasn't quite prepared for with this car was the fact that the bottom is all Torx head screws as opposed to hex screws. Thankfully I've got a large library of screws here. Now it appears that a T6 Torx head screw is the one you need to remove the chassis from the body. Try and find one that has a long stem. The one I've got is kind of short. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get this open with the tooling that I currently have, unfortunately. Oh, maybe it'll fit. Looks like it'll just fit. Okay, so with the body removed right off the hop, I can see there is no factory installed magnet to remove. This is the first time I'm seeing the inside of this car, so I'm just kind of assessing how things are assembled. The guide has some sort of unique eyelet set screw system, which I'm fairly happy about, and the front axle does appear to have top and bottom grub screws installed, and the rear motor pod is pretty unique. I'm actually excited to try and get the most out of this car because it does feel as though with the right setup it could be quite rapid. I mean, these factory tires, not that you can judge tires by just the way they feel in your hands, but in terms of what I've already opened compared to this, these tires feel supremely grippy right out of the box. So we'll see how things go with this car. Let's get it back together and then we'll do a couple of quick close-ups and move on to the very last car.
This is the last car, and as you can tell from the box, it's a LeMans miniature. These cars are kind of unique in the way that they're super high detail, not necessarily race worthy. The reason why I bought this car is in real life, this particular car is so amazing to look at. And if you can find YouTube videos of it online with the sound that this thing made, it would have been life-changing to see this thing ripping around the track with other cars in a competitive environment. So let's get this open. It is the Jaguar XJR 14, and this was raced in the Nurburgring in 1991. You know, looking at this car, the rear spoiler is absolutely ridiculous in terms of how far it sticks out the back. It's practically nearly the height of the vehicle from the ground to the top of the roof. I mean, as a slot car, it's highly impractical, but as a kind of showpiece, call it a shelf queen if you want, it's pretty striking. I mean, I don't think I would be too happy to leave this thing in the box. I will try and find a way to put this car on display. Whether or not that it'll get raced around the track with the intent of running fast laps, probably not. I'd be concerned about this rear wing braking. Honestly, I just don't think it's going to be a high performance vehicle. But all in all, I had to have it. It's my second one. The first one I have is the Peugeot 905, another strikingly different car, huge rear wing, again impractical as a racing toy car, but as a collector's item it's something to look at. We'll get on the inside and just take a better look at it. So what I see right off the hop, quite a few screws involved to get this chassis out of the body. One thing I do notice about some of these cars is the wings, they almost look like they're glued on, and they're not necessarily glued on in the most pretty fashion, to say the very least. My Peugeot, when I got out of the box, actually the wing was floating around the container, which I wasn't particularly happy about. It's a simple fix. And I noticed with this car right away that the drivetrain gets stuck, so I'm wondering if there's a problem with the gearing. We'll have to assess that once we get this open. So let's just focus on that right now. So in true LeMans miniature uniqueness, you pull the body off, the front axle stays with the body. You get this kind of half tub with this cockpit that's just kind of loosely fit in there. The driver even loosely fit in there. Rear axle comes out quite easily. I say that before I can get it out. It has these kind of comical bushings. I wouldn't call them high performance. They are just kind of loosely fit on the hubs, and then the way that they sit on the, call it the inner part of the body, kind of oddly aligned with these little notches in the hubs. So not a really high performance design, but we're not here for high performance. This is all about details. Let me just work on getting this back together. Now, looking at the rear of this vehicle, you know, the plastic gears are pretty low quality. There's obviously an alignment issue because it seems to come to a dead stop here. I don't know if there's something in the gearing itself or if there's just a misalignment. It looks like there's a problem with the pinion gear. There's a sizable gap. No, actually there's a physical crack. So call it what it is. We'll just have to get a different drivetrain for the rear. I will reach out to Electric Dreams to see if they can assist me with correcting this issue. I'm quite certain that my Peugeot kind of suffers the same fate of this drivetrain. So we'll find a solution. We'll get there. We'll get this car drivable. In terms of detail, you really can't beat this type of car. So all in all, this car is not going to be a top performer, but it's not really why I bought the unit. I wanted to have this as part of my collection as sort of a showpiece on, you know, the history of Group C and having such a physically beautiful car to look at that I choose not to drive aggressively on my track is just one of those things that you kind of decide for yourself. I'm sure everyone out there has a car that they kind of cherish a little bit differently than the ones that you actually drive. So anyways, I hope you guys appreciate this car for what it is. Good evening, everyone. Just a quick closure to this unboxing video. There's some changes happened here on the Sunshine Raceway. I've got some work to do in the next couple of weeks. I have these polystyrene pieces that my father has made for me. And they are going to go along the curvature of this area here to close in that gap. Bit of work to do under here. I've got my new my new iPad stand here for running the race software up to the TV. On top of that, I have some SLOTCAR Scenic track pieces that have been painted that I need to integrate into my bridge section. This is something that I've been putting off for a while, but I think it's time to get the job done. It's going to be a little difficult here where the pit buildings are, mainly because the straight pieces here have these girders underneath, so I'll have to sort out, you know, I might have to trim some of those back just to get it to fit. And then the last thing that I'm working on here on this giant mess of mine is the GNS tire sander. I've got most of the parts. I just need to get the rubber bands for the drive system. If you guys haven't seen this product, I would highly recommend looking at the YouTube video where the gentleman who created this is actually doing an assembly. It's pretty well built. I'm looking forward to giving it a test around here with some tires that I've been eager to true. All right, so other than that, just trying to get some enjoyment out of this before it gets too cold in the garage. The winter season is fast approaching, but I got some plans to have some pals over and hopefully do some digital and analog racing with them. Yeah, the plan is to hopefully get more people involved so that maybe next season we can actually do some fairly decent club racing. Anywho, until next time, I think October, I'm going to do a video that is kind of geared towards getting the maximum ability out of the Smart Race software. I'm working on something specific with the Smart Race app. There's plenty of features that I think are a little bit untapped, and I'm hoping to uncover how they work. And once I do, I will be sure to share that information with you guys. Take care. We'll see you next time.